There's this funny trend going on right now around the internet where women, I think somewhat facetiously, I think everybody's in on the joke and having fun, but where women are discovering that the men in their lives are really kind of obsessed with something and they haven't really disclosed that. Women have been reporting the results of what happens when they go up and ask their husband how often they think about not other women, not gambling, not sports, not work, but the Roman Empire. And what women are discovering is that men, it seems, think about the Roman Empire quite a bit. And the tweet that started all of this is from Reverend Kelsey Lewis Vincent. And she wrote, I saw an Instagram reel that said something along the lines of, quote, women have no idea how often the men in their lives think about the Roman Empire. So I asked my husband, how often do you think about the Roman Empire? And without missing a beat, he said, every day. And then she writes in all caps, y'all, why? I mean, I think it's funny for sure. I think she understands that it's kind of a silly, funny question. But also, I think it's a really valid question because men do think about the Roman Empire. Every single dude who I called and asked before I turned on this camera just now was like, oh, yeah, for sure. And I could even tell you why I think about it and why I think it's interesting. But it's not just men who think about the Roman Empire. Everybody's thought about the Roman Empire since the Roman Empire was a thing. The whole era of the Middle Ages is the church and government and military leaders and artists and musicians looking back at the glory of the Roman age and trying to recapture this sense of order and beauty and symmetry and glory that existed during that time. And then you think about the age of revolutions like the French Revolution, the American Revolution. I mean, all the symbols that got adopted from the really obvious ones like the eagle, which is, of course, the symbol of Rome, to the design of the big official government buildings in my country with the marble and the pillars and all of that. All of that is Roman. The language of government is Roman. The language of our law is Roman. We use Latin in science to describe scientific names for animals. We use Latin in the terms that we use in law. I mean, it's everywhere. So I don't think it's this unique thing that men think about the Roman Empire. No, I think men, women, everybody, consciously and subconsciously, has thought about the secular institution in all of history that I would say casts the longest cultural shadow of any of them ever. Now, I think the thing that has the biggest gravitational pull of anything ever in history is Christianity, Jesus of Nazareth, all the things that go along with that. I don't know. I guess I would say it's entirely historically normative that dudes sit around and think about the Roman Empire. And I got a little list here in my head that I want to go through of why I think that is. So, reason number one, I think that Rome represents an era that is just a great story with big, bombastic characters who've long since evolved into legendary characters with these big stories. It's violent. The motivations of people are so grand and overt that it's kind of a mixture of Shakespearean characters and ancient Greek characters all mushed together. And for the same reason that people like Game of Thrones, the stories are juicy and fascinating. And every time you think you've heard them all, you hear a new one. And so I think people are fascinated by the narrative side of it. I guess I'd call this a second reason is that glory was a huge value in ancient Rome. And I don't think glory is an exclusively masculine attribute or pursuit, but guys are certainly into that. And there's a lot of simplicity in a lot of the stories dating back to the Roman Empire. And when you look back on the age of Rome, you see that the great men and the great leaders were interested in pursuing their own glory, accomplishing something great that would be chiseled in stone and remembered across the millennia. And that takes me to a third reason that I think men think about ancient Rome. I think it's fascinating to a dude in an age where there's so many people on the planet. We all kind of know each other. We're all connected electronically. Nothing really stands out. I mean, entertainers, sports figures, politicians now are silly caricatures of themselves. There aren't really politicians to look up to. The idea of just this great man of glory and accomplishment, there's not much of that around now. It feels way different, but that that idea of what that glory looked like back then is something that I think is fascinating to men and women as well. But particularly, I think a lot of guys look back on that and they're like, well, how did Julius Caesar end up being remembered? How do we know so much about him now? How did he have the courage to do such decisive things that would change all of history? Did he know he was changing all of history when he did that? What am I doing with my life? I think dudes think about that. I think dudes also think a lot about what it would be like if they got dropped into that setting. Would they have what it takes to rise to the top and succeed? What if I got to keep all of my knowledge about the modern world? I bet you every dude, I mean, go, if you're a woman watching this, go ask a man in your life if he's ever run this little equation in his brain. I think every dude has thought about what it would be like to time travel back to the court of some Roman emperor, Caesar Augustus, Julius Caesar, Marcus Aurelius, whomever, with all the knowledge they have now. And they could just invent football, and they could explain basic principles of electricity and physics and warfare, and they could write the best songs and the best poems. They wouldn't be writing them, they'd be stealing them from thousands of years worth of people. I would write musical composition that should be called Don't Stop Believing, and I would present that to the noble court of Marcus Aurelius, and he would absolutely love it because it's great. I think dudes think about that kind of thing. Would I have what it takes without the knowledge that I have from today? And how would the knowledge and the skills I've acquired in this age translate to back then? Here's another reason I think dudes think about the Roman Empire, and that is because it's knowable. If you try to think about the 20th century, for example, a lot of guys seem to be really interested in World War II. But even just that little era, it's too much. You can't know all the players, you can't go through all the sources, you can never read it all. I mean, you can never touch all the primary original data about World War II. But with Rome, you can. It's knowable. It would take a long time. You could know almost everything about Rome. It would take a lifetime of study, but it feels like it is just barely attainable. Whereas once you get much further into history, it just starts being too many details and you can't keep it all straight. A sixth reason I think men think about it is the appeal, though, of how much isn't known about it. There are all kinds of mystery boxes, and some of them keep getting opened. Everybody knows about the ruins at Pompeii. It got soaked in lava and everybody died and it got frozen in time. And it's not fully excavated yet, meaning there's still stuff under that dirt and ash that it's just a function of time. We just need to get in there with the right tools and dig it up. We're constantly learning new stuff about Rome and filling back in the gaps of our knowledge about the past. And that's really fun. It's kind of the Indiana Jones attraction to all of it. I think this might be the big one right here for most people. My buddy George, I asked him this question. I said, all right, do you think about Rome? He said, like every dude I talked to said, oh yeah, for sure. It's like, well, why do you think men think about it so much? Why do you think about it so much? And he said, because it fell. Ah, yeah, it's a tragedy. It's not ongoing. It's a sliver of time. Now, I think when most people think about Rome, they really are thinking about the Roman Republic and the Roman Empire from 100 BC to about 100 AD, maybe a little bit more on each side. If you go a little bit further back, you get the parts where Rome fights against Hannibal and his war elephants and the Punic Wars. If you go a little bit further forward, you get into Marcus Aurelius and Commodus, the stuff that you get in Gladiator and D. But let's call it that window right there. About half of that time, you've got the very end of an old and glorious republic, kind of like Star Wars and the fall of the old republic and the rise of the evil empire. It's really interesting how that old republic eventually gave way to corrupt leadership, people who were more concerned with their own glory, and a disconnect that grew over time between these powerful people who viewed Rome and its citizens as pawns in their big elaborate games. They had fake wars. They did all kinds of horrible, corrupt stuff. And eventually the system just couldn't sustain it. The relationship between the state and individuals couldn't sustain it. This beautiful thing collapses after the assassination of Julius Caesar, and then a new thing rises up in its stead, with the first emperor being Caesar Augustus, Julius Caesar's godson, Octavian, same guy. And so this window right here, the old republic and the new empire, there's so much there that corresponds to modern Western social life and political life. And yet once you've seen those patterns, once you've been through even a college class or listened to a podcast or read a couple books or a primary source on what Rome was like and what happened there, you just can't unsee it. We know how it works out. So where are we in this cycle right now? Where are we in the story? And I think it's pretty natural as you think about the state of the world for your brain to go there. It is so socially and politically applicable, and it didn't work out. To say that Rome fell is maybe a little bit of an overstatement. Rome sort of morphed into less noble, less impressive things over time. If you take the big broad view, I mean, you have to admit, Rome was a certain way, the dominant superpower on earth, the biggest, most impressive culture, civilization, military machine, economy, bureaucracy, administrative state that the world had ever seen, and then it wasn't. We tend to be interested in cautionary tales. I think dudes are pretty good at ignoring them too. But it feels like Rome is a parable. There's lessons there to be mined in terms of how the world is and what human nature is like, what goes wrong with absolute power and political leaders who aren't good at what they do and aren't interested in the welfare of the common man. A final thing that I've got written down here that I think is that I think dudes think about the Roman Empire. I think all of civilization for the last 2,000 years has thought about the Roman Empire. I think the ladies who think a lot about the Roman Empire think a lot about the Roman Empire because there's one other event that occurred right on the transition between the Roman Republic and the Roman Empire. Right in the middle of all of this, the Jesus of Nazareth thing happens. Now, look, whatever you make of that, we divide time between before his birth and after his birth. That's a really big deal. It's the watershed moment in human history. And even the Bible acknowledges that that time was somehow providentially ordained by the God of the Bible to be the most interesting, the most compelling time for things to happen. In the New Testament book of Galatians, it's in like toward the very end of the Bible. This is a letter written by the Apostle Paul in the middle of the first century AD. And so, right in the heart of this Roman stuff that we're talking about. And all of this is being written against the backdrop of the Roman Empire. He's talking to some people who are brand new at following Jesus, and he comments on the fullness of time. Listen to this Galatians 4:4. But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son, born of woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law, so that we might receive adoption as sons and daughters. And he goes on to talk theologically about the Christian understanding of how God resolves human failure and sin through the work of Christ. But the point is, even the Bible acknowledges that there was something very special theologically about this particular historical moment. It's kind of an interesting exercise to think about, well, when would have been a better time for the God of the Bible and the Bible story to take on flesh and come into the world as Jesus did? Would it have been more effective in the age of early television in the 1950s? Would it have been more effective during the age of the Industrial Revolution? How about the age of the super ancient Greeks, or when the Egyptians were very powerful, or the Persian Empire? What about the age of knights in shining armor? Would that have been better? Well, but then you think about what Rome was and how well documented it was, and the network of communication, the way cultures could inform each other uniquely at that moment in history. You think about the technology, the system of roads, the safety of maritime travel. Oh, a universal couple of languages. All of that adds up to it being really about as good a moment as you could possibly come up with for taking something like what Christianity is and seeding it into the middle of the map, into the middle of the world for maximum distribution, for maximum effect. It is this flex point, this pivot point, this inflection point in history, and that really does have everything to do with this character, Jesus of Nazareth, and the massive influence that Jesus and the church, the religion that grew up after his death and resurrection has had on planet Earth. There are a lot of reasons that Rome is going to be on people's map, on people's radar. Like I was saying at the beginning, I think Rome casts the longest shadow of any single secular institution in all of history. And I just want to give a gigantic high five to everybody, men and women, who sit around and think about it, because I agree that it's important. I think it's a really big deal. And I'm also enormously charmed by this little meme, this little trend that's going around the internet. People learn more about their significant others and how they think about the past. So, yeah, I realize it's just a fun, goofy little thing on the internet, and it probably doesn't merit an entire video. And if you're catching this part, it means that you're still here. So maybe you see it the same way. Either way, thanks for thinking about this thing with me. I'll make other videos about other things later on. I'm Matt. Thanks for hanging out with me on my YouTube channel. Let's do this again soon.